Roland H. Bainton, Chapter 17, The Open Bible. Those little illustrations there. England was already Protestant when Knox began his work in Scotland, leading to the union of the two countries. England came first to be Protestant through another conflict of church and state. Like those contests which had been frequent in the Middle Ages, the earlier struggles never had very serious results for the unity of the church. The ruler would be excommunicated and the country interdicted, but in the end the ruler would yield, or the Pope would soften his demands, and church and state would work together again. Perhaps the same thing would have happened this time in England if the Protestant Reformation had not already started in Germany and Switzerland. The King of England was Henry VIII, who was married to a Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon, and she was the aunt of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. All the children of Henry and Catherine died as babies except one, and she was a girl, the Princess Mary. Henry was afraid that if he did not have a son to follow him on the throne, when he died there might be a war as to who should be king. There had been such wars in England just before his time, the Wars of the Roses. He feared that if he had no son, the wars might break out again. For that reason, he asked the Pope to let him put away Catherine and to take another wife. The Pope, of course, would not grant a divorce, because the New Testament condemns any divorce. But there had been a flaw in Henry's marriage, which would make it possible to say that if it had never been a proper marriage. The Pope might have been willing to say this had not the Emperor Charles V stepped in to stop Henry and the Pope from doing anything to his Aunt Catherine. Henry thereupon took things in his own hands and separated the church in England from the church in Rome. The king himself was made the head of the English church for the management of its outward affairs. The Archbishop of Canterbury became the head for religious matters. The new church was called the Church of England. Yeah, don't start religious organizations because of your personal conflicts, but then again, in America it is called the Episcopal Church. The word Episcopal comes from Greek for bishop, and an Episcopal Church is one ruled by bishops. There are, therefore, many Episcopal churches, but there is just one which calls itself the Episcopal Church, just as the Western and Eastern churches separated because the Greeks and the Latins had drifted apart, just as the Protestant Reformation spread to the north rather than to the south in parts because the Germanic and the Latin peoples were different. So now a separated church was formed in England because in this country a strong nation had grown up separate from Europe. The world of the Middle Ages was splitting up, and the church was divided at the same time. Henry took advantage of the split to take money away from the church. There had been long quarrels over money matters between church and state. Now Henry saw his chance to shut down all the monasteries and take all their lands and buildings and income. Really, the monasteries were not so useful as they had once been. In an earlier time, they had been retreats from the so-called barbarians, outposts for Christianizing and civilizing new countries. Again, civilization goes way, way, way before Christianity. Thank you very much. Centers of learning and hospitality. But the Black Death of 1348 ere vulgaris took the lives of so many people in England that there were not enough left of the right kind to fill up the ranks of the monks. The Catholic Church, who decides what the right kind is? Should it be a spiritual matter if you're talking about monkery? The Catholic Church itself was closing down some of the monasteries. Henry went ahead with a high hand and closed them all, pretending to have caught the monks in wicked living. Well, certainly some were, but not nearly as common as one may think. The Church of England, however, was not very different from the Church of Rome. Most people, wicked living, a little bit less than most when it comes to the monks. That's sort of was not very different from the Church of Rome. The majority of the English people still love the Catholic Church, its sacraments, and its services. In making changes, Henry moved slowly. The man whom he chose as Archbishop of Canterbury was Thomas Cranmer, who shared some of Luther's ideas and really believed that there had been a flaw in Henry's marriage. He was glad to see Henry break with the Pope and set up a separate church, just as the princes had helped to reform the church in Germany. The town councils had helped in Switzerland, so Cranmer believed the king had the right to reform the church in England, and to be its head, and to manage its outward affairs. Cranmer was willing, therefore, to go slowly, so long as the king wished to go slowly. The only important change at first was that the Bible, in English rather than in the Latin language, well, Latin was a translation anyways, was placed in all the churches. The translation chosen for the purpose had a curious history. It was largely the work of William Tyndale, who translated not from the Latin of St. Jerome, like Wycliffe's helpers, but from the Greek Testament, printed by Erasmus. Tyndale could not print his book in England because at that time Henry was hoping to get what he wanted from the Pope and was doing his best to please him. Henry even wrote a book against Martin Luther, and the Pope called Henry the defender of the faith. The words which mean this in Latin, Fidei Defensor, are still on the English coins, usually FD. Though the faith has changed, Henry at that time was so afraid of displeasing the Pope that he would not permit a translation made by a Protestant to be printed in England. The work was done in Germany, and the book smuggled in. The English officials brought up as many copies as possible for burning, and Tyndale got the money from the sales and used it to put out a better printing. After Henry broke with the Pope, this book that had been brought up for burning was placed by archbishops. Well, it was placed by Archbishop Cranmer in all the churches. Most of the English people accepted what Henry did. A few of the monks and churchmen and officials of the state believed that he, as king, had no right in any sense to be the head of the Church of Christ. Well, condemning him because he's a powerful political leader in his own. There's issues with that. Nor had the English Parliament any right to make laws for the Church of Christ. Henry put to death those who would not submit. Honestly, everybody in office operates according to their own beliefs. Deal with it. Or, which by convincing them or whatever. Among them was the gallant Sir Thomas More, whom the Roman Catholic Church has lately made a saint. When a friend told More that he should recognize the king as the head of the church because Parliament said so, More answered, "Suppose Parliament should make a law that God should not be God. Would you then say that God is not God?" When he was being taken by the guard to be imprisoned in the Tower of London, his daughter dashed through the soldiers and threw her arms about his neck, saying, "Oh, my father, oh, my father." In his last letter to her, he wrote, "I never liked your manner to me better than when you kissed me last, for I love it when daughterly love and dear charity hath no leisure to look to worldly courtesies. Wit and courage did not leave him at the end. To the officer at the scaffold he said, "See me safe up. I'll take care of myself coming down. I die," he said, "loyal to God and to the king, but to God first of all." Henry did marry another wife after putting Catherine away, but the second wife also had no son, only a daughter. The Princess Elizabeth, a third wife, did have a son, who, when but 9, followed his father as Edward VI. The real order of the country was, the real ruler of the country was his uncle, and he was much more Protestant than Henry had been. Encouraged by that fact, Protestants of the hotter sort began to write poems against the bishops of the Catholic Church and against the Pope to urge that England, as fast as possible, should move away from the Church of Rome. Here is one of the poems of the bishops. It is said, "Alack for Christ's might." Well, their might projected upon Christ, but these things go not aright. Our lanterns give no light. All bishops be not bright. They be so full of spite. They care not whom they bite. Both friend and foe they smite, with prison, death, and flight. So daily they do fight to overturn the right. So we be in the plight, that losing of our sight, we know not black from white, and be thus blinded quite, we know not day from night. Of the Pope they complained. He robbed all nations with his fulminations and other like vexations, as with abjurations, excommunications, aggravations, presentations, sequestrations, deprivations, advocations, resignations, dilapidations, sustenations, administrations, approbations, assignations, alterations, narrations, declarations, locations, collocations, revocations, dispensations, intimidations, legitimations, insinuations, pronunciations, demonstrations, vacations, convocations, deputations, donations, condonations, excusations, declamations, visitations, acceptations, publications, renunciations, false foundations, and dissimulations, with like abominations of 1,000 fashions. While the people were being stirred up by such poems, the king's uncle went ahead and stopped the Catholic Mass. In its place, he ordered a service in accordance with the views of Luther and in the English language. Archbishop Cranmer was given the task of preparing a prayer book for the Church of England. He succeeded so well that the Book of Common Prayer, more than anything else, had endeared the English Church to the English people. The words to be said in serving the so-called Lord's Supper were these: "The body of our Lord Jesus Christ, which was given for thee, preserve thy body and soul to everlasting life. The blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, which was shed for thee, preserve thy body and soul unto everlasting life." Now, vicarious suffering doesn't quite... I'd say, well, yeah, when you offer a sacrifice, you're offering a sacrifice. It's not sacrifices being made for you. So the law of atonement in what's called the Old Testament, you got to touch the body at the very least. It's not just, oh, well, someone in the area is doing something. No, it doesn't quite work like that. Much less a human, someone in a human body being punished for the sins of another. That's just not acceptable in that so-called Old Testament way of thinking. And in the words of Christ according to Jesus Christ according to the Bible. But Paul had a different opinion. These words would satisfy a Lutheran and perhaps even a Roman Catholic. They suggest that Christ's body is really in the bread and the wine. Strict Protestants, therefore, disliked these words, and for their sake, Cranmer put out a second prayer book, in which the form was changed to read, "Take and eat this in remembrance that Christ died for thee, and feed on him in thy heart by faith with thanksgiving. Drink this in remembrance that Christ's blood was shed for thee, and be thankful." The word remembrance suggests that the Lord's Supper is only a reminder of Christ's suffering. Well, if he was really this great spiritual master, why did he have to suffer? Why couldn't he have just gone through the difficulty and that been it? As Zwingli once had taught, feeding in the heart was what Calvin believed. Edward was a frail lad and died when he was 15. He was followed by his half-sister, the Princess Mary. She was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon and had never left the Catholic Church. Now she brought all England back to the Roman Church. Then the Protestants suffered, as the Catholics had done under her father. You can torture people and they'll never suffer. So they went through difficulty. But, the word was used. They didn't really think one from the other, so I do understand. The leading bishops were burned. When Bishops Ridley and Latimer were bound at stakes at Oxford, Latimer said to his friend, "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as, I trust, shall never be put out." Cranmer was in a very hard place. He both believed in Luther's gospel and that the king might choose the form of religion. When Henry and Edward chose Protestantism, there was no problem, but when Mary took England back to Rome, Cranmer consented and then tore up his consent. This he did several times, and in the end cursed Luther and Zwingli and himself for following them. Nevertheless, Cranmer was condemned to be burned, and before his death he was required to stand in the church at Oxford and repeat his submission to the Queen and to the Pope. In the midst of this, Cranmer broke off. "Now I come," he said, "to that which troubles my conscience more than anything that if I ever did or said in my whole life, and that is that through fear of death I signed with my hand what I do not believe in my heart. When I come to the fire, the hand shall be the first to burn. This hand shall be the first to burn." He went out smiling. When the fire leaped up, he held out his right hand in the fire, in the flame, until it was burned away. Well, you're going to be burned to death. What difference does it make? Might as well make a point of it, of how you can. So they probably tied people better after that point. But Mary ruled only 5 years and was followed by her half-sister, Princess Elizabeth. People by this time were weary of beheadings and burnings. Elizabeth wanted to be done with all this and to satisfy as many people as possible. Of course, she had to decide to be either Protestant or Roman Catholic, and she did decide to be Protestant, but she tried to require from the people only those beliefs that would be least troublesome to Roman Catholics and acceptable to all Protestants. In the prayer book, she simply put together the forms of Cranmer's first and second books. Elizabeth would not tell anyone what she herself believed. She is said to have written this verse about what is called the Lord's Supper. Oh, that's the guy sticking his hand forth and surrounded by flames. Okay. Christ was the word that spake it. He took the bread and brake it. This is what his words do make it, that I believe and take it. Now, certainly any prophet would have gone through that, and any Christ. Remember, Christ, the Messiah, is a word used for a series of people in the Bible. Here is an Elizabethan family at prayer. And let me remind people that the difficulties physically that a person could have can stop people from certain things, and that's okay.